climate change priorities. Let me read something from this book I have. I'm sure it's contraband by now, right? Direct access to the French, German, and Italian consumers allows Gazprom to earn a higher margin on its sales. It also gives a greater control over the source of the gas sold within these countries, and again is a way of excluding other suppliers. The effort to gain dominant control as part of Gazprom's long term strategy. In addition to France, Italy, and Germany, Gazprom has either already succeeded or is trying to gain control of internal gas pipelines and distribution systems in Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, Switzerland, Austria, Finland, Turkey, Hungary, Greece, Latvia, and Lithuania, where Gazprom now owns 34% of Lithuania's pipeline grid company, Lietuvos Dujos. Now, this is just one paragraph, right? That's what I opened to, how the spirit is. This is a book that was put out by Oxford University Press in 2008. It may well be outdated. They may have increased or decreased their market share. They may have, I don't know, entertained even greater visions of glory when it comes to dominating internal distribution of countries besides their own. They may well have, right? But what I do know is that letter from the Judicial Commission was dated at the beginning of a conference. Same day was around a conference that was happening concerning the Gazprom Bank in Russia, where they had a major event on December 4th that I understood was connected to what should have happened in September, but didn't get to happen in September because that time frame was precluded from being able to come into effect in the way it otherwise could have if there hadn't been, nearly 10 years of chastisement going on for reasons that nobody to this day has been very forthright about. And I bring this up because it's very concerning to me, these ways that they talk about. For instance, for that matter, there is nothing to prevent Gazprom from making a similar investment in U.S. gas companies. Well, there's this other book that actually talks about how there were similar investments, right? That there were investments between Gazprom and Exxon specifically, and that there were also investments between Gazprom and another oil company that it was actually mentioned in the next sentence, as well as other oil companies in Iraq, right? Yeah, for a long time. And I bring this up because I understand that there's a very, very serious question right now about all of these outstanding things and what went into it. And you could talk about gas and distribution of gas, and this is very important, especially because of the fracking. Yeah, I know, right? But I'm also concerned about the water. And I just want to put something in context. Whatever you think your priorities are, especially when you try to do this thing with children and school children and education, there's an article up right now by the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, B'Tselem. I remember talking to some people from B'Tselem when they were talking about the results of the Landau Commission report and how it went into these long-term considerations that were going on in Israel and Palestine concerning what the Landau Commission report was about. Does anybody remember? This guy, he was a justice of the Supreme Court in Israel, in some case. There was a commission, they filed a report. Okay, that was a long time ago. What is B'Tselem discussing at this time frame here? This is a 2014 article, but it's very relevant. This would have been within about a year's time of 2 years from when I wrote an article about a subject similar. This is about, what is this talking about? Undeniable discrimination in the amount of water allocated to Israelis and Palestinians. And so it goes down here, and one of the things it says, Palestinians in the West Bank who are connected to the water infrastructure. The average daily consumption among Palestinians connected to a running water network is about 73 liters. There are significant gaps between the various cities. 169 liters per person per day in Jericho, compared to 38 in Jenin. It goes on to say how many people in the water and the networks in the various areas. And then they talk about Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Average consumption in the Gaza Strip is 70 to 90 liters per person per day, but the quality of the water is extremely poor. 90% of the water pumped in Gaza is considered unpotable, according to the standards set by the World Health Organization. Now, does it say how much water they get in Israel? Well, to be honest with you, in this specific, it says here, according to the Israeli National Water Company, Mekorot, the average household water consumption in Israel is between 100 and 230 liters per person per day. The World Health Organization recommends a minimum of 100 liters per person per day. Okay, why am I bringing this up? Let's put it this way. It says right here in the West Bank between 38 and 169 liters per person per day, where the average is 73 liters per day. This is in 2014. This would have been before the major effort in the United States, the big successful campaign that everybody has been so dedicated to for the legalization of marijuana. Why is this important? What does this say? Right here. What does this say? How much water does a cannabis plant require? Well, it says right here. What does this say? This is important. Well, no rule is fixed about how much water a cannabis plant needs. One thing that affects this decision is the geographic, and then the other is your gardening situation. If you grow cannabis plants in some northern areas in Europe, you may only need 2 liters of water every 3 days because in this area the humidity is well preserved by the soil. Do you mean 2 liters of water per plant? I think that's exactly what they mean. 2 liters of water per plant every 2 to 3 days. Now, in some places, in Spain, for instance, the same cannabis plant may need triple that amount of water because in this area the sun quickly dries out the soil. So that means in Spain you would need 6 liters of water every 2 to 3 days per plant. How many plants do you need? Is this just for personal consumption? Well, not anymore. That's the whole point. That's how successful you've been. Your political paradigm's been that successful. It's no longer about trying to justify decriminalization because of cultivation for personal use and personal consumption. Now we have entire entrepreneurial endeavors. Trillion. At the beginning of 2020, there was more than $1 trillion in private equity dedicated to cannabis startups. $1 trillion in private equity. 2 to 6 liters of water per day per plant. I'm sorry, every 2 days. I'm just saying, I don't agree. If you really want to try to do this thing where you get so morose and so sad about how dedicated you are to your political principles, you really, really need to reevaluate your priorities because your benchmarks of success are actually completely inadequate. And so it's one of these matters is you have a community of people that have done that thing, right? That tyranny of the majority where something happened and what is allowed to be reflected as popular will ends up engaging in a collective course of action that is not only deleterious to the society, but actually implicates the nation state in grave crimes, including grave crimes that have a direct impact on the environmental capacity for life to actually exist, then what do you do? And so the consideration of that which would otherwise be identified as tyranny, or that would otherwise be identified as a dictator, takes on a different dimension. It really does. This is a big problem that we're having right now. If you told me that one person had the capacity to turn off all of the gas production and all of the gas distribution pipes in the country at an instant, and that this was somehow considered to be undemocratic and indicative of other bad policy. Well, let me ask you, did they allow for you to engage in commercial cultivation of marijuana, including in a time frame during which it was understood that drought conditions were causing massive forest fires and that food security had already been compromised? Are you going to need gas or electricity to power your grow rooms? Because I know somebody's going to say, well, we've engaged in water conservation. We have internal grow rooms. We're going to conserve on water. Are you going to need electricity? Okay, let's say you get a greenhouse and you do some sort of water, even if you do some sort of gray water. The problem is, by and large, none of you are doing that. And so the leveraging here is to say that that kind of culture and ethos is supporting human rights and supporting the rights of people in other parts of the world. And what's the cost? I would not give you 2 to 6 liters of water every 6 days for cultivating marijuana. And then the question becomes, how much do you need marijuana? And how important is marijuana to you that you would risk all of the other water you would need to have and other people would need to have because you insist on getting credited and getting acknowledged for the need you have, including in whatever context you want to consider it a right, to demand consideration and prioritization of your 2 to 6 liters of water per plant every 2 days, right? And so that's where we're at right now, and it's kind of like one of those situations where, I mean, I've been doing any other thing in the world. You could have had access to any other thing in the world, but you don't want anything else except for this. All right, I'm letting you know right now. I would not support budgeting 2 to 6 liters of water every 2 days per plant for cannabis cultivation. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't do it. And if I found out that you were stealing from other water supplies in order to try to get 2 to 6 liters of water per day per plant for your cannabis cultivation, I would hold you criminally responsible. And if you insisted on engaging in crime up to and including infiltrating the government, destabilizing the federal government to the point of insolvency, laundering money through your local administrations that were providing you with cover for your illegal distribution while they worked on changing the laws so that other things were penalized for refusing to prioritize your economic model, I would hold you criminally responsible. And I would not budget you 2 to 6 liters of water every 2 days per plant for your cannabis cultivation. I think that's pretty much where we're at. Is that every day, regardless of what I could give you and the quality it could be, that's not what you want. You're absolutely insistent that I prioritize and hypervalue the cultivation of marijuana and all that's attended with it. Can you grow marijuana without any water? Until you can, there's nothing for us to talk about in this regard.